details are too important to be left up to juries.
The defense has retained Rank and Fitch as their lead jury consultants.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's find 11 more jurors just like her.
$20 million ought to be enough to secure a jury.
They're using video surveillance, wiretaps, finding out things about jurors their husbands and their wives don't even know.
This is about you messing with my case, and the rules are law.
That's what I was hired to do, fella.
The fact is the jury's mine, and I can push it either way for a price.
How did he sound?
Rich.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to my podcast. I'm your host, Shalini. And for those of you that are new here, I'm a screenwriter and I'm also a lawyer. And I started this podcast because I wanted to analyze films from a screenwriting perspective, first and foremost, as well as look at it from a filmmaking perspective. On that note, we are starting off our year with a legal film, which is Runaway Jury. Runaway Jury is a film about a high-stakes court case against a gun manufacturing company who hires a jury consultant to basically help the defendants pick a jury as well as help them sway the jury towards a favorable verdict for the gun manufacturing company. Now, unbeknownst to both the plaintiffs and the defendants, they're two independent people who basically managed to infiltrate the jury and basically sway the jury whichever way they want. And so they decide to sell the verdict to whichever side is going to pay them the higher amount. The movie came out in 2003, and it stars Dustin Hoffman, John Cusack, Rachel Weisz, Bruce McGill, Jeremy Pivens, Nick Cersei, and it stars Gene Hackman. I'm actually filming this on the day that we find out that Gene Hackman has passed. He passed away this morning, and it was just really crazy because I had plans to film this today, and I looked at the news this morning and found out that Gene Hackman had passed. So I do want to take a moment to say that he was a very tremendous actor. He had a very influential career, and he will be missed. And, just thoughts and prayers out for him and his wife's family. The movie was directed by Gary Fleeter, and it was written by Brian Koppelman, David Levian, Rick Cleveland, and Matthew Chapman. Brian Koppelman and David Levian are basically, they also wrote they worked on Ocean's 13, and they're the co-creators and showrunners for the show Billions. Rick Cleveland did 6 Feet Under and West Wing, and Matthew Chapman did The Ledge and The American Guest on HBO. So really fantastic writing team. I think they did such a great job. The movie is also based on a book by John Grisham, which came out in 1996 by Doubleday Books. And yes, I managed to get the book this time. Very interesting book. I've never read John Grisham before. This is my first foray into his book as well. Yeah, it was good. It was interesting. He's a lawyer. I mean, I don't know if you know, but John Grisham is a lawyer, practiced law for 10 years. And then I think he bases like a lot of his stories on cases that his friends are still working and stuff. So like very legally sound. Like you can read his books as a lawyer and not get annoyed. Now we are about to dive into the film, but I have to give a spoiler warning. I will be talking about all points of the plot. So if you have not seen this, it is currently streaming on Paramount Plus. Go watch it now and then come back and listen to this. I also want to give a trigger warning. The gun, I mentioned this is a case about a gun manufacturer. I will be talking about gun violence a bit. I will be talking about mass shootings, some of the mass shootings that have happened recently. If this is a very sensitive topic for you, just skip this one. Tune into a later one. Take care of yourself first and foremost. But I just want to give that warning for anybody who might find this topic a bit sensitive. But on that note, let's dive into our story. So there's a few differences between the book and the film. I'll get into a few of them. Like it's very similar, and there's just a few differences. One of the differences is the book is set in Biloxi, Mississippi. Mississippi and Biloxi in general is a very familiar ground for John Grisham. He went to Mississippi State. He went to UMiss. He worked for Mississippi House of Representatives. The film is set in New Orleans. That is why I am wearing my PJ's Coffee sweatshirt. There's a lot of good coffee places in New Orleans. Obviously, people see Cafe Du Monde. Community coffee is huge. PJ's Coffee just happens to be one of my favorite brands. They're not sponsors of the film. I just happen to love them. So yeah, I had to wear my New Orleans sweatshirt for this. The film takes place in New Orleans. So when I was researching and I was doing like fact checking almost, I was also fact checking the locations because I was like, is this happening where they say it's happening? And it does. It checks out. Like the entire film, like physically checks out in New Orleans. So I was proud of them. They did a good job filming it. Basically, we start our day with Jacob Woods. He's going over the high rise towards New Orleans. We get a lot of beautiful sunrise, sunset shots of New Orleans, like shots that I've honestly never seen having grown up there. Beautiful shots. He's on his way to his investment firm. It's chaotic, like they're freaking out because Greenspan's speech is delayed. And he says this line, which is kind of sad, but it's like, it's Monday, buddy. There'll be a Tuesday. It was sad because, he goes into his office. He's called his assistant into the office so they can just talk about, a song he has to remember for his son's birthday. And then shots start firing. And it's very chaotic. We see shots going off. People are scrambling. They're falling on the ground. And Jacob Woods barricades himself in his office. His assistant is hiding behind the desk. She's calling 911. They're putting her on hold. She's so frantic. Jacob Wood, I keep saying Jacob Woods. Jacob Wood is like looking out, like trying to see what's happening. And then everything goes silent and we think that they're okay. And then all of a sudden the door bangs open and he gets shot and killed. It's a very chaotic scene. Like, I think it's actually important. They do a good job of kind of showing the chaos, the quickness of it, like the fear, like the franticness of it. I think as far as capturing like the feeling of being in an active shooter situation, I thought they did a really good job with that. But sadly, Jacob Wood dies. And we fast forward 2 years and we get to meet our protagonist, Nick Easter, played by John Cusack. I just want to say off the bat, John Cusack is very good in this role. He is so monotone and borderline sarcastic, and that very much plays into the character because there's a lot of times that he says things, and even Marley will say things, and they're kind of saying the truth almost, but because he in particular is so sarcastic, you're like, oh, he's being sarcastic. And it's like, no, actually, you said the truth. Happens a few times in the film. But he's leaving his very beautiful apartment in the French Quarter. And it's interesting because he's leaving and he's talking to his landlord. His landlord is smoking and like coughing while he's smoking. And he's like, you really should stop smoking. Like, those things will kill you. And that's actually a nod to the book because the book is actually a case against a tobacco company. Again, the book came out in 1996. The film came out in 2003. And so I was just wondering, like, why they changed it to gun manufacturing. And, my theory was that there was a lot more cases in the 90s or late 90s against gun manufacturers. Obviously, Columbine happened. But according to like different sources, they changed it to gun manufacturing because the movie The Insider came out. And that was a movie about them taking on big tobaccos. They wanted to differentiate. But in my own personal opinion, I thought the whole plot of going against a gun manufacturer was a really brilliant plot. I thought it really hit. But back to the film, Nick goes to check his mail, and we see that he gets jury summons, and he's like, Christmas came early this year. And again, that's another line that we read as sarcasm, but I think that's Nick, like, actually happy that he got it. He leaves his apartment, and we see that he's being surveilled. Not sure by who yet, but he's being surveilled. And he goes to a voodoo shop, and he's trying to buy a candle. And again, like, people don't really know this, but voodoo actually takes a lot of elements of Catholicism. Catholicism doesn't really acknowledge voodoo as a part of their religion, but that's why he goes to a voodoo shop to buy a candle for a saint. And he has a chance meeting with Marley, who's played by Rachel Weisz. And he tells Marley, he's like, I'm trying to buy a candle because I got jury summons. And Marley's face is like shocked. Like, it's like, oh my goodness, this happened. Before she composes herself and she's like, where's your sense of civic duty? And she tells him to buy the St. Catherine candle because St. Catherine is the patron saint of jurors. And I thought it was interesting because St. Catherine is also the patron saint of lawyers. And I just feel like the lawyers need as much help as the jurors in this case. Yeah, basically, like, Marley leaves the voodoo shop. We think she's happy because she had a meet cute with Nick Easter, but I think we know she's happy because Nick got called for jury duty. And then next we meet Gene Hackman's character, Rankin Fitch. Truly such a wonderful, wonderful villain, I'd have to say. So when we meet the character Rankin Fitch, he is driving in a cab And the cab driver turns to him and he's like, oh, you're not from here. And you can tell because, like, you know, the cabbie is from New Orleans. Like, you kind of just have a demeanor. You're very personable. You're very, like, cordial and easy to talk to. So he can tell immediately that Rankin Fitch is not from there. And Rankin Fitch, like, ends up looking at little pieces of information, like a picture and a parking ticket. And he puts it together that, like, the cab driver's mom is sick, but they had to bring her home. And it's a very interesting scene because just taking these very small pieces of information, like Rankin Fitch is such a good analyzer. Like, he has made a living in charging millions of dollars to analyze people. And he puts this information together and he's accurate. Like, what he says is true. And I thought it was such a jarring scene because, you know, in New Orleans, like, again, you have these interactions that are so personal and so, like, just cordial. Like, if you sit and talk to someone, they might tell you about their life. Like, if he actually had a conversation with the guy probably would have said, this is my situation. Like, and it was weird to see that kind of intimacy. Like, he knows what's going on, but he does it in a very cold, calculating, analytical way. And it's very jarring. But we also see that Rankin Fitch is very good at his job. Like, he's so good at his job and he's worth the money that they are paying him. Next, we meet Jeremy Piven's character pre-Entourage days. And again, like, very fascinating to see these people. And he's waiting to meet the plaintiff's lawyer, Wendell Rohr, played by Dustin Hoffman. And they're having a conversation, and Green is like, you know, you want a jury, you know, you want, like, someone who can give you a psychological analysis as you're picking the jurors. Like, you want someone on your side. And, like, Wendell Rohr is just like, well, why do you want to be a part of this? And at one point, Green is like, well, nobody wins cases against gun manufacturers. Like, people don't win gun cases, Mr. Rohr. And it was a good line because, again, in one line, you have the setting that it like world sets for you. You're like, okay, we live in a world where nobody has won a case like this before. And, like, Rohr is just pushing him. He's like, well, why should I hire you? Why should I pay you money? Like, what is your worth to me? Blah, 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 blah. And then finally, Green is like, I believe in a world without guns. And that's the thing that gets Rohr to hire him. And it's such an interesting scene because we actually get to see a little bit of Rohr's, like, interrogation skills and, like, actually what a good lawyer he is at extracting information in a way that is not so subconscious, like, not so conscious. Like, he was trying to get at why Green wanted this job. And when Green finally admitted it's because he believes in a world without guns, Rohr was like, okay, we're on the same page. Like, we can be on the same page about this. Rohr is a good lawyer. And it's also interesting because it, like, you know, again, Rohr had already looked into him. He's already analyzed him. Like, he is good at his job. And they don't want you to undermine him because he's, like, very Southern. He's, like, very much New Orleans lawyer. Like, this is his court. Like, these are his people. Like, he knows this town. But they don't want you to undermine his intelligence. Again, like, his character is a little bit different in the book because in the book, him and the defense are a lot more evenly matched. Like, they're both kind of in it for the money to an extent. And then they both also, like, I don't know, they both kind of have, like, a team of lawyers. Like, it's not so uneven. Whereas here it's like Wendell Rohr is just really, really good lawyer who's going up against the defense who has Rankin Fitch. And actually, as we're seeing this conversation between Green and Fitch, we are also getting to see behind the scenes of Rankin Fitch's operation. This operation is absolutely insane. It's like they have computers, they have analysts, they have boards, they have files, they have, like, surveillance footage. It is such a well-oiled machine. There is one point where, like, one of their consultants was running late and Fitch cuts him and he goes straight to the backup. Like, it is such a well-oiled machine. And we really see, like, how intense, like, Fitch runs things, how intense his operation is, like, how thorough he is. Like, it really all of a sudden puts the defense, like, oh wow, the defense is, like, you know, doing all this crazy stuff. And then here you have, like, Green, who's just having a conversation with Rohr, and they're, like, it's very, like, homey and just a very casual conversation. And we get to see, like, how different these two situations are. We also, you know, as we're also seeing, like, Fitch's operations, like, we see, like, the way he analyzes. And it's exactly what happened with the cab driver. Like, he's picking up on the way people walk, the way they interact with other people, like even subconsciously their body language as they're passing someone, like the way they're interacting with animals or their environment. And he's putting together all of these pieces about the person's personality. And I'd have to say, like, this is his hubris. Like, this is the thing, like, he's good at it, and we've established that he's good at it. But we also need to keep in mind that, like, he is so good at his job that he doesn't really question it anymore. He doesn't question himself at all. And I think that's why the defense hires him and why the gun manufacturers like keep working with him. But it's important to remember, it's important to realize that he's at this point in his career, he doesn't question at all, like that what he does is good and he doesn't have to worry about if he's wrong. Like he knows he's right. So they get to Nicholas Easter, they're analyzing him as a juror. They basically surmise that he's like a bit of a class clown, a little bit like a people pleaser, like he'll fall in line, but he's also wants to make too many people happy. And so he's a risk, so they pass on him. Now, what's not said in this scene is that like you think like, okay, someone who wants to make people happy, like you have to understand that they can only influence the jury so far. And at some point, jurors may vote under peer pressure. And we actually like see this again in the film, but like there's, we've seen this before in other films too, where juries vote one way or another based on peer pressure. And so having someone like Nick, who they think just wants to make everyone happy, is a huge red flag, because like if the majority of people don't want to vote for the gun manufacturer, he might do that. Too much of a risk, so they pass on him. Before we go any further, I do want to talk about two of the major themes of the film. The first one is understanding people. We're going to see three different ways in which people understand other people. One way is done extremely analytically. It's done with a lot of facts, a lot of like piecing together a profile of a person. One is done very culturally, knowing people, like understanding them, getting to know them, but in like a very like interpersonal way. And one way is like just kind of seeing people as humans, like almost as whole beings. And this, I guess I'll get into it now, but like, if we're really going to break it down, like Rankin Fitch kind of sees people on this very like granular level where he knows all these very, very intimate details. Rohr, again, he's from New Orleans. Like they don't say it in so many words, but like he's a New Orleans lawyer. Like he knows New Orleans people. He knows the jury. He knows what people think in this case. He knows people on a very like social level. Like he interacts with people who are potential jurors. He is able to like converse with them. Like this is his world. Like it's again like a very societal level that he understands people. Then you have John Cusack's character, and also not even Marley, really John Cusack's character, that aren't looking at people as like their details of who they are or where they're from or what the culture of the area is like. He's kind of looking at them as like just humans. Like what do these humans care about? Like what do we owe each other as humans? So it's kind of like to me, it's like an interesting layer. But then you have Rankin Fitch at the bottom, knowing people on a very granular level. But then he also comes up at the top too, like it's a sandwich between his process, because he knows people on such a granular level that they also become just profiles to him. So he doesn't know them on all besides these profiles and these summations that he makes about them. So that's one theme. The second theme with this film, which, I'm not even sure necessarily a theme of the book, but the theme of the film is money versus justice. It's a question of like worth and power and like what people do, like basically how people use money to have power versus like what is right, like what is just, what is the correct thing. And we see these two themes come head to head a lot. And so, just looking at the scene where we basically have Rohr and Green's character, like talking about justice, like, nobody has won a case against a gun manufacturer yet. So why are they bringing this case? It's because they believe in justice. They believe in like fixing what's right. They believe in like setting some kind of precedent that you can sue gun manufacturers. And on the flip side, you have Rankin Fitch, who just got paid so much money to have such an intense operation, that like, he it's about like he's not worried about what people think, because he's like, okay, like I have the power with all this money and with all this like skills and equipment that the money affords me, like I have the power to influence this jury. Like it doesn't matter if I don't know them on a societal level or if I don't know them as people. I have the power. So we have these two dichotomies in the film. Again, we see that play out a lot of times too. Before we go any further, maybe it's also a good time to define runaway jury. It's not a term that I know from law school, but I also never went like the trial route. I was very much like a contract lawyer. So a runaway jury, according to my research, is a jury that basically makes use of their right to act independently. They think independently of the court, or they issue a verdict about the true values of the case. I got those definitions from US Legal and from a Denver trial lawyer's blog post. Again, it's not something that's ever come up in my experience of studying, trial law or civil procedure or anything. But I guess it's a thing. But I guess the whole point of runaway jury is it's basically, it's this idea that jurors aren't necessarily listening to the orders of the court, and they're not even necessarily just listening to the facts of the case and ruling fairly, they're doing what they want. I get the sense that in the book that kind of plays out a little bit more because the jurors, at some point they become aware that they're being manipulated, and they're like, you know what? We are going to look at the facts of the case. We are going to make a decision based on the merits of this case. So runaway jury is very much more the idea applies a lot more in the book because they really just want to make their own independent decisions regardless of all the blackmail and pressure happening around them. I don't know if we see that as much here, but it plays out. Okay, we finally get to jury selection. So, we start with basically seeing the defense lawyers being completely rigged up with cameras, suitcases, microphones, that they can hear and that they can transmit sound. And then, you can see what's happening with the jury. So Rankin Fitch and his whole team can see what's happening. I really like this scene because the lawyers are uncomfortable. So the lawyers are like, well, what are you putting behind my ear? They're not cool with what these, with this crazy team is doing. And it's it's so interesting. This is my thought process. You basically have lawyers who are fine with what Fitch is doing. And, there's interaction where they kind of disagree. And Fitch is like, well, I'm going to make the decision. And the lawyers were okay with that. It was interesting to me that the defense would spend so much money to hire Rankin Fitch, but they wouldn't necessarily spend that much money to hire a lawyer who was part of Fitch's team, or a really, really, really good lawyer who's done this before. It's clear that these people have not done this before. And to me, that actually shows it was such an interesting tell on the defendant's part, the gun manufacturer's part, because it's to them, it's almost they realize that they're liable to an extent. They know that they're not going to waste their money on getting the big flashiest lawyer that they can find, because if you rest on the merits of the case alone, they are liable to an extent. I think that's what it told me. It's not about the law. It's not about how good the lawyer is. It's not about how good of a case they present, because to some extent they are liable. And so instead of spending money on a really big, flashy, big city lawyer, or someone who's tried these kinds of cases a lot, or someone who's worked with Rankin Fitch before, they decide to just hire 2 people from the area. And this because as the defense is entering the courtroom, they're having a conversation about checking out a restaurant in Pascagoula, which is far. It's actually, again, if it was taken from the book, Pascagoula is not far from Biloxi, but Pascagoula is a few hours from New Orleans. You're not going to go out to Pascagoula to try a place. I bring this up again for 2 reasons. One, the lawyers are from the area. They're a lot like Wendell Rohr in the sense that they know the area. They are small town lawyers who are just being used by the gun manufacturers because this is where the case is brought. But the entire case is not in the lawyer's hands. The entire case is in Rankin Fitch's hand. The second reason I bring this up is from a screenwriting perspective. I always say that the mark of a good script is that every single line serves a purpose. This film is no exception. There's so many background lines that are said and you think it's a throwaway line, but they serve the purpose of setting the scene, telling you something about the characters, setting the tone. a lot of like the lines that are delivered around the case time, it's setting the world. Like this film feels very timeless because like they keep saying like nobody has brought a gun case before. And I think that's interesting because you don't have to know in your head, like you don't have to know what is the status of gun cases in the late 90s and early 2000s. You don't have to know that because they're telling you whenever this film happens, like people haven't successfully sued gun manufacturers. So the lines are so important. And really like it's such a mark of a good script. Like there's no wasted lines. Like it really bothers me to watch TV shows or movies where there's stupid lines and it's like, what is the point of this conversation? This movie is not that. Every single line serves a purpose. And again, this line where the defendants are talking about checking out a restaurant in Pascagoula, it's showing you that they are not like these high profile lawyers. They are like small town Louisiana lawyers. It serves a purpose. Okay, then we get to voir dire. Voir dire is the process in which you are basically interrogating the jury to see if they would be a good juror for you in your case. This isn't really like touched on in the film, but like jurors fill out a questionnaire beforehand, and like it is typical for lawyers to look into jurors. Like the movie doesn't touch on that. It makes it seem like, at least with Roar's side, like this is the first time he's encountering them. No, like lawyers are able to look into jurors, are able to look through this questionnaire that the jurors have answered before they get to voir dire. It's not like voir dire is the first time that they're talking to them. I saw this interesting thing in my research that said you don't pick a jury, you're basically unselecting people who would not be a good fit for your case. And I thought that was so interesting because, we think about jury, we think about how many people end up in a room, which can be a lot of people, like up to 100 or more sometimes. And still out of that number, it's not like, you can draw up your profile, or Rankin Fitch can draw up his profile of his perfect juror and he could find one of that, if even. And like, it doesn't matter. Like that's actually the beauty of having a jury by your peers is it's so diverse, and you're not like you basically are not trying to find the perfect person. You're trying to like get rid of the people who you don't think are going to help you. So just background on the process. You can dismiss, both sides can dismiss a jury for cause because you think this person will be biased towards the case for whatever reason. But you also get a preemptory challenge, which you can dismiss someone with just no explanation. And they mentioned it in the film. Because you only get so many preemptory challenges. Like you can't just preemptory challenge everybody. And I don't know why this is important. Lawyers love this, but it's the 7th Amendment that gives us a right to jury trials in civil cases. I don't know if people know this because if you think of juries with criminal cases, you can get a jury trial in civil cases too. Some cases are just judge cases, but you can get a jury trial. So that's why this is a civil case. We have a jury trial. In case anybody was wondering that, because most times we only see jury cases in movies when it's with a criminal trial. So when we start to get with voir dire, it's again a juxtaposition of the two sides. As the defense is questioning, Rankin Fitch is analyzing and pulling up like different backstories and like looking at this profile and analyzing this and saying like, take him, nix him, blah, blah, blah. And then you have Roar and Green, and they're just looking at each other across the courtroom. And at one point, like, is when they were interviewing this guy, Schaefer, and Green just like shakes his head like, no, don't take him. And Roar's like, well, take him. And it's, we can see that they don't trust each other. And like Green and Roar don't have that kind of, symbiotic relationship yet. But we do get a guy who's very nervous, like very eager, a little too fidgety. And then the defense decide to let him go. And he jumps up and he, smears blood on him. And he's like, no, I want to be on this case. This is for the blood, for the people who are killed by guns. And I thought it was so interesting. I keep saying this is so interesting, but like we needed this character because we needed to see this is one version of being a stealth juror. One version is like I'm not saying one version, but what I'm trying to say is the way this guy did it was very obvious. Like he was very eager to be on the case. He was like, trying to answer the questions in all the right way. And he wanted to be on it because he wanted to stick it to the gun manufacturer. And it's very important to get that so we can appreciate like how nuanced and complex Nick's plan is compared to what this guy had planned. Basically, after this guy blows up, goes crazy, jury is adjourned for the day. And Fitch goes to a private meeting way out in the boondocks. Very beautiful. But basically we get a bit of background on the defense case, and all of the gun manufacturers have gone in, they put in $20 million to hire Rankin Fitch in order to be a jury consultant on this case. And Rankin Fitch is meeting them because he's asking for like 12 million more, I think. Yeah, 12 million more. And they're like, well, why should we pay that? Like, that's a ridiculous amount. We've given you 20 million already. He starts talking in numbers and he's like, well, this is how many people were killed. This is how many cases are brought. Like, this is, I don't know what other facts he gives, but he's just throwing numbers at them. And he's like, well, how about the number 1? Because that's all it takes is one case to basically set the precedent that you can sue a gun manufacturer for liability in this reason. And it's a very valid point because we have seen that play out where, once you open up the pathway for liability, for holding an entity liable, whether or not those cases are successful, it then makes that entity liable to be sued. And that's what he focuses on. Like, he's focusing on the numbers. He's focusing on like, not even about the money, but like, this is important to you and your entire like companies rest on this. I also thought of it, he delivers the line, basically what I think is the like log line of the film, which is trials are too important to be left up to juries. And it ties back to the theme of the film, which is like, he doesn't trust people. He doesn't trust where people's values lie. He doesn't trust, to be completely frank, like if this case were in Texas or this case even in Louisiana today, I think this case could have an outcome that's favorable to gun manufacturers. Like, but it's interesting that he doesn't trust people and where their like values lie. So he relies on money and he relies on power to like influence the outcome. And he's just on this like one whole spectrum with like, he's not messing with people's values, not messing with like where their morals lie or anything. He's like, this is a tried and true method. We are going to go with this method. The wide day resumes the next day and a blind man shows up. It throws everybody off. It throws Fitch off because Fitch is like, he was basically automatically excused because he was blind. And the gentleman says like, I shouldn't be automatically excused. Like basically the law says like I can serve. He quotes the law to the judge and the judge is like, yeah, fair point. This is a very pivotal point, not pivotal, but like it's an important note because Fitch has like crafted what his ideal jury would be. And then this guy who didn't even make his list of people to surveil shows up and they take him. So his entire like balance of what he thought the people dynamics was going to be is thrown off. Then Nick Easter goes to the stand. Nick Easter is like playing with his watch and he like tells the judge like the Madness challenge is coming up. Like, I should be excused because of that. The judge kind of tells both sides like, let's take Easter. And the defense is like, okay, well, Herman Grimes, the blind man, threw off our dynamics. Now we need someone who's like, someone who'll just go with the flow and is like a people pleaser. So let's just take Easter. That's how Easter gets on the jury. From here, basically we see like now that Easter is on the jury, I think he trusts that he's not being surveilled. So he basically goes out to this house and that's when we see that he knows Marley, they're lovers. And when they also see that they have been analyzing people, they've been analyzing their own jury. From here, we get to the first day of trial. Again, like Herman Grimes coming really throws a wrench in Fitch's plan. So you have to understand, like, this goes back to actually how like Fitch doesn't understand people. Like, even if this guy was on the list, I don't know if Fitch would have like taken him because Fitch mentioned a few times before how they're relying on Frank Herrera, who's an ex-Marine. They're kind of thinking he'll be a leader, he'll be the foreman. And it happens in the room. Like Frank puts his name forward and then all these other people like pop up and put their name forward. But then Nick is like, how about Herman? because Herman is blind, he seems to know the law, like Justice is blind, like he also seems very knowledgeable about the law. He also was able, to stand on his, like basically stand up to the judge. And they all vote unanimously for Herman, and like Frank's vote was kind of peer pressure. And again, like we see peer pressure, like it's a societal thing. Like there's like so many interpersonal relationships happening, and this is a moment where it's like a societal relationship. Like everybody voted for Herman, so it looks bad if Frank doesn't vote for Herman. It's important to note though that like Fitch's plan is already not going well, but like he doesn't know it, and I don't think he's worried about it, but like the whole dynamic he had set up is already not playing out. Anyway, they select him as foreman and then they head out to the trial. Now, I am going to get into the facts of the case. We learn about it throughout the whole film, but I thought it would just be easier to tell you all the facts at one time. So basically, on the day of the shooting, the gunman killed 11 people in less than 2 minutes before turning the gun on himself. And the widow of Jacob Wood, Celeste Wood, is bringing a torts case against the gun manufacturer, holding them liable for her husband's death because they sold guns on the underground market. The gunman killed himself, which is why he is not being held liable. It's not a criminal trial. It's a, torts case. It's a negligence case. Basically saying that like they basically like let guns get into hands of criminals, but then also they marketed it towards criminals. The reason, like, we get this whole backstory that like this hasn't been done before. Nobody brings like gun cases before. And the reason that like Wendell Moore is so excited about this case is because an ex-executive of Vicksburg Firearms has agreed to come testify against the defendant, against Vicksburg Firearms. And this is his like smoking gun in his case, unintended. We also find out that there's like a distributor, Excalibur Guns, which is like selling to a guy, Mikey, like basically, Vicksburg Firearms, a gun manufacturer. Then you have Excalibur Guns, which is like the store. And they're selling to this guy, Mikey, at a rate of like 25 guns a month or something. Like he's buying a huge amount of guns. And like they basically question, like, yo, like, did you not notice? Like, do you not notice that your guns were going to a single person ever wondering what was happening? And it was this guy who sold the gun on the underground market to the person who went and shot up the investment firm. And, at some point it does come out in the case that Vicksburg knew because they were actually like rewarding Mikey for selling the guns. This is a negligence case. And again, everybody probably understands this about the law, that you have like civil cases and you have criminal cases. And again, this isn't a criminal case because the person who actually did the crime killed himself. So we're not holding it against him. This is a negligence case. And with the negligence case, they're basically saying that like the gun company had like basically did something liable within their care of duty. They helped cause this event to happen. And I think for me, a question that comes up is like, how far back does causation go? And I think it's really important to say, like, if they had not done this, X wouldn't have happened. I bring this up because at one point, like, they bring up this case, like, are you going to sue McDonald's if you are unhealthy or have diabetes or something? And it's such an interesting point because it's like, yeah, like, if I am hurt, but I think food is a great example. Like if you're eating a ton of fast food, like, are you going to hold them liable for your health problems? And like, I think it's very interesting because you have to look at causation. And I think that's why they talk about like, in the film, they rely so heavily on the marketing of the guns as well as the distribution of the guns, because you have to ask, like, what did they do that caused this specific thing to happen? And there has to be a direct line. Like it has to be, if you weren't doing this probably most likely would not have happened. And so causation is just a very interesting question, and it comes up a lot. And it crossed my mind with this film, especially when they brought up like the case, like if I'm eating McDonald's, am I going to sue for being overweight? Like it does bring it up because you have to understand that like the law does draw a line. The law is like, okay, you know, there has to be a line of causation. Like, you can't say like this happened, which caused this, 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 which caused this. At some point there has to be like a more direct cause and a direct line. And they don't go into like causation in great detail in the film, but I think it's important. It's like I thought it was important, and I thought they did answer it in the film, which is like, they talk about this gun store. They're not talking about negligent distribution across the United States. They're talking about this one specific store, and this one specific person was buying a huge quantity of guns from this store. Like, they're getting into the actual like facts of the case to show causation and to show like this, if not for this, like this wouldn't have happened. And they're directly tying it to Vicksburg firearms. And yeah, I just thought it was a very interesting point. I guess if you're not a lawyer, maybe other people think of that. I don't know. I thought of it because I was like, what is the causation? Like, why isn't this just like, how can you hold them liable? So for those of you who are wondering, that's a bit of the backstory on that. So we're learning about the facts of this case because the lawyers are basically giving their opening statements. Roar is basically saying that like we're holding them liable because they made it so easy to buy guns on the underground market, and they marketed it specifically for criminals. And during this time, going back to the movie, like Marley is sitting in the jury, and she basically gives both sides like a jury for sale sign. And it's like, a jury can't be bought for $16 a day in a brown bag lunch. And they don't know what that means. But they break for lunch. Nick and Marley have worked it out so that Marley delays the jury's lunch. They're waiting. Nick sneaks out. He basically finds the judge at a restaurant, and he's like, hey, like, we haven't eaten and we know you want to get back to court quickly. We need to have lunch. Fun fact, that restaurant is Cafe Pontelba, very close to Jackson Square. It's still there today if you want to go check it out. And like basically the judge like works it out so that like the entire jury is eating at this restaurant, and Fitch drives by and Roar is walking by, and they're seeing this entire jury like eating. And so they're like, oh crap, like this is exactly what the postcard said. And both parties leave before everybody at the table raises a toast to Nick. And they're like, to Nick. And Nick is like, no, to Judge Harkin. And it, both Roar and Fitch leaves. They don't see that. Otherwise, they probably would have put it together sooner that Nick had something to do with this. But they both head out. So they don't see that part. Anyway, we get to the evening time, and, Green and Roar are talking about it, and Roar dismisses it. And he's like, you know what? Like, this is not important. I get stuff like this all the time. This is a tactic so the defendant moves for mistrial. Then we see Marley calling Fitch and Roar. And she, she's kind of like, I can sway a jury your way. And they both are like, no, you can't. Like, you can't do this. Prove it. She's just like, I hope you're feeling patriotic. And her and Nick, like, basically manufacture it so that the jury says the Pledge of Allegiance the next day before they start trial. And it is this moment that like Roar is taken aback because he's like, oh crap, like what I thought was just an intimidation tactic by the defense is clearly something else. Like there is someone who's influencing and selling me the jury. He starts to take it a lot more seriously. Fitch starts to take it a lot more seriously too. And he like is analyzing the film, like he's analyzing the video of them saying the Pledge of Allegiance, and he correctly deduces that it's Nick. Like they were doing it for Nick because the woman like pats Nick's hand because he said he had a friend who was like lost, who was killed that day in fighting. So they deduced that it's Nick, and we get a wonderful scene where like Fitch is so angry. And he's like, how did this confidence man crash my jury pool? And he's like, Mr. Lamb, give me a hypothetical. And Lamb's like, I don't know, blah, blah, blah. And Fitch is like, and Fitch is just like angry and he doesn't listen. But going back to what I said, that there is no wasted lines in this film. So what looks like Mr. Lamb rambling is actually Mr. Lamb giving us like the exact thing that Nick probably did. So if you're wondering how Nick got onto the jury pool, this is Mr. Lamb's hypothesis, and it's probably true. He was like, who wants to be a juror? Nobody. Because nobody wants to be a juror, why would someone want to hack and find a jury list? Like, why would someone want that information? It's very useless to people. So there's no security systems on these computers. There's no like, there's no like locks. There's no like firewalls or anything. So it's easy to hack a jury system. It's easy to put your name on a list because nobody wants to be a jury. And again, he delivers this line in like a very harried way. And we're just paying attention to Fitch, who's just like, I don't know how this happened. Like, I don't know what you're saying. Like, whatever. Like, let's just find out what we can about Nick. But he gives us the answer, and it's really, really great. Once Fitch finds out that Nick is the person, he basically sends Doyle, Nick Cersei's character, to go investigate Nick's apartment. Nick gets out early, and again, I love like the New Orleans blocking because the film, like they film it at the Circuit Court, which is kind of in the French Quarter, and Nick's apartment backs up. Where we see where Nick's apartment is. And it's close distance. Like he can get out of court and actually end up in his house very quickly. It's just a few blocks walk. So Nick walks in and see Doyle like kind of like rummaging through his room. Doyle has like downloaded his hard drive and stuff, and they end up fighting, and Nick chases him, and like they jump the wall into the Court of Two Sisters, which is how I know where the location of the apartment is. And Nick is just chasing him, and he finds him in his car and like bangs up Doyle's car before Doyle like drives away. And then Marley calls Fitch, and she's like, "You don't play nice. Like, I'm gonna bump one of your jurors." So they get one of Fitch's jurors bumped. Fitch gets really angry, and he's like, "We need to find whatever you can." Like, he's so angry because now he realizes that he's trying to influence a jury, but then you have this other party trying to influence the jury, and he doesn't have complete control over the jury. So he's like, up the research on these people, find what you can to blackmail them, find what you can on Marley, like find anything. At the same time, the plaintiff side is falling apart. Basically, like, at first we get to see like the guy who I think was selling guns at Excalibur Guns, and then we see the person who sold the gun to the gunman. I can't remember if I'm remembering this correctly. If it was one or two. Anyway, we see the man who sold the guns to the gunman, and he testifies that he never had any guns buying from the distributor. And then on cross, he said that Vicksburg Firearms didn't know that he was selling guns. Basically, he flips on them. Like, we see like one of the key witnesses on the plaintiff's side like switch sides and turn on them. Not a good sign for the plaintiff. It's not going well. And by this point, like Fitch is blackmailing people. They're really putting the pressure on people. And so Nick is like looking around and like noticing how the jurors are kind of upset. Like they're distracted, not really listening to the case. Like, which is interesting because the thing that they're missing is like a point in the case that hurts the plaintiff's side. So what Fitch is doing is like, in theory, not working because they're not paying attention to something that's helpful to the defendant and they're missing it. But maybe they were saying like, hey, you need to be like swaying this to the defendant's side so it doesn't matter what they hear. This is like a really interesting scene because 3 things have just happened. Fitch missed that Nick ended up on the jury. In all of his research and all of his surveillance, he never got that Nick Easter is some kind of con man. He has failed. Wendell Rohr has put his faith in people. He has put his faith in people's sense of justice. So the guy who sold the gun to the gunman was his witness, has come forward and was his witness. I'm pretty sure. The way they make it seem like his witness. And he had this faith that this guy had like a sense of justice, that he wanted to do what's right. And the guy flips on them. And he actually sides with Vicksburg Firearms and says they didn't know that I was selling guns. Nick knows people on a personal level, like just in a, you are a person, I'm a person, we are people. And his like charmingness and his like rapport and his like ability to just talk to people and connect people isn't working because like people are so upset and distracted. So all 3 of their tactics for getting to know people is not working at this point in the film. So from like a screenwriting perspective, the stakes are just getting higher. And then we get to this evening scene where all the jury's gone out for a drink together. And like everybody's really upset. And one of the jurors, Ricky, ends up like taking pills and drinking because she's so upset that like she's being blackmailed because she had an abortion. That's going on. At the same time, like they find out that Fitch finds out that there's nothing on Nick's hard drive. And he's like, no, we need to go find like the iPod. Like the iPod is the thing that has the information. So he sends Mr. Janovich, I think, along with Doyle to go ransack Nick's apartment. At this point, Green is starting to suspect Nick. He saw Nick in the courtroom noticing all the jurors, and he's like, okay, like this really important testimony is going on, and this guy is paying attention to all the other jurors. So he's like, something's going on with Nick Easter. So Green goes to Nick's apartment right when Doyle and Janovich are ransacking it. They find the iPod hidden in the wall. They torch the place and they're leaving as Green is kind of like going through the mail. So these two men have like a cross in the entryway. Then Marley and Nick meet up in a church. And like, this is the first time that we really get the sense that this is not about money to them. And we also get that they are falling apart a bit because like Nick cares about these people. Like he's been hanging out with these people. He's getting to know these people. And like, he knows Fitch is really hurting them and putting the pressure on. And Marley just has her head in the game. She's like, it doesn't matter. Like, let's keep going. We have to keep going. And Nick Easter is like, but people are getting hurt. Like, this is guiding intent. Like, you are not in it. You do not have your apartment torched. Like, this is getting serious. And Marley is like, we have to keep going. To her, like, it's just theoretical stress. Like, it's like she's in it, but she's not in it the way Nick is. So, like, them also together as a unit is becoming very fractured. They decide to like set a date with Fitch. And then we basically, this is the night that Nick's apartment is torched. So Nick turns in the video of, Doyle entering his apartment the first time. He turns it into the judge the next day. And the judge is just like, I hope this isn't one of both, I don't know whose person this guy belongs to, but like, I will not be dealing with any more like shenanigans in this trial. The defendant tries to move for mistrial and the judge is like, no, we are not having a mistrial. Like I am sequestering the jury. Fitch is so angry because like he can't access the jury anymore the way he wants to. He can't continue blackmailing them. It doesn't matter if he like finds more things. He can't influence them the way he wants to. And then as they're leaving court, Green tells Roar, he's like, I was at Nick's apartment. Like, he basically tells him like Nick is the inside man. And Roar, again, like this goes to like the values. Like Green tells him, I went to Nick's apartment because I suspect that he's the inside man. Roar immediately is like, you're done. We're done. Like, you do not do that. You do not tamper with juries in this way. You do not mess with them. You do not go to their personal residence. We are done. And I love that line. Like, again, it goes back to like morals of the case, like power versus values. Like Roar won't even cross this line. Like Green didn't do anything. He didn't break in. He literally just like walked in the front door and looked at the mail, which you're not supposed to look at people's mail. But like, it wasn't like as nearly as far as what Fitch is doing. And Roar is like, that's too far. We do not do things this way. But Green brings up the point. He was like, there's a power play going on between Fitch and Nick Easter. And he was like, a mistrial, like if Nick was influencing the trial, that would benefit the defendants. Like they can go to the judge and say, hey, this guy is, a stealth juror. We are calling a mistrial. So why hasn't the defense done that yet? And Wendell Roar realizes that it's because the defendants are going to pay for the verdict. Like it would benefit them to out Nick. Like it would be really helpful for them to like say, the jury has been tampered with. We need a whole new trial. But instead of doing that, they're going to pay for the verdict. And at this exact moment, Celeste Wood comes up and she's very worried about the case. And she's like, I heard there might be a mistrial. Like you said, we had it in the bag. You said we got this. Like, I just need to hear it again that we got this case. And Roar has to sit and assure her when he all of a sudden realized that he doesn't have a handle on the case. And at this point, we're kind of like exactly in the midpoint of the story. And the stakes have just gone up for like all three parties. Like Fitch has no control over this anymore. Like, he doesn't have control over a sequestered jury the way he wants to. Roar realizes that, like, he can't, the defense is like going to pay for this verdict, or like he's up against something huge. Like, he's up against just relying on the merits of the case, which is what he was banking everything on. And, for Nick Easter and Marley, like, they're realizing, like, this isn't about us. This isn't about our personal agenda. This isn't about us getting money, because at this point, people's lives are being affected. People are being blackmailed. They're being hurt. Ricky hurt herself by taking pills and drinking too much. Like, this is serious. This is not a game anymore. And this isn't just the two of us who are being affected. So the stakes for all three parties have just gone way up, and we have just hit the midpoint of the story. At this point, because things have gotten so incredibly intense, Nick and Marley decide to set an appointment with Fitch. So they meet at Palace Cafe. Again, another real restaurant, lovely restaurant. And it's a very clever tactic. They send someone in to basically lure Fitch out so that Marley and Fitch can have a private conversation on the streetcar away from, like, photographers and stuff. It's a very hostile, like, tense meeting. They are like he just wants to give. She asks for $10 million. And he tries to give her a check for $500,000. She laughs it off, and he gets, like, he's very, like, hostile to her, and he, like, assaults, like, grabs her and is like, you should take this money, and really tries to threaten her. And she plays it off very well, but she's very shaken by it. Soon after, she has a meeting with Wendell Roar, and it's like a totally different tone with him. She, like, sees him they meet at Cafe Du Monde, again, great restaurant. And he's, like, eating a beignet and, like, brushing powdered sugar off his face, and she finds it very endearing. And they meet, and one of the first things he says to her is, "I know you're playing both sides." And she's like, "We are?" And she says it in a way, she's like, "We are?" And again, you can read it as "we are," or you can read it as "we are," which is a question. And if you really watch it, like, she's asking it, like, we are playing both sides? Like, are we? And I love their interaction, because she's, like, having a discussion, and it's much more of a discussion of equals, because she's like, you're not going to win this case. Like, you're not going to be able to rely on your star witness to be able to take down Vicksburg Firearms. Like, Fitch is going to get to him. Like, you cannot go to a mistrial, because you're not going to put Celeste Wood through that again. I keep wanting to say Woods, but I think it's just Celeste Wood. It's and he gets angry. Like, it's interesting, because both Fitch and Roar get angry at her, like, angry, and they're yelling at her. They both assault her. I say assault, but, like, they both grab her, and, like, it's still, grabbing is grabbing. You shouldn't grab a person for sure, but, like, it's still a different tone. And when Roar does it, he grabs her and he's like, who hurt you? Like, who made you this way? Like, he needs to understand her in a language that he understands. And again, like, Fitch talks in numbers, and she knows that. So she can have this conversation with Fitch, and she's like, 10 million. He's like, 500,000. She's like, 10 million. Her and Roar, like, she can talk to him about the merits of this case, but he doesn't understand her. Like, there's something he's not getting with it, because he doesn't quite get how someone can, like, do this for this case. And he's like, do you know what you're messing with? And again, like, it goes back to his beliefs on just people and the humanity of people, and, like, where values lie. And he doesn't see her whole picture, so he can't put it together for himself. Like, he doesn't know, and he can't even trust it, because it's such a high stakes case. But, like, that's where Roar comes from. Like, Roar is, like, trying to understand this, like, personal level. Anyway, like, the whole interaction is photographed. Marley was being watched. Roar was being watched. It was all photographed. The next day, exactly like Marley predicts, the star witness does not show up. And because of that, like, Roar just has to, the plaintiff rests. Like, they don't have anybody else to call. Like, that was their smoking gun. I hate using that. I don't know. It's like the key point of their case. And they don't show up. And Roar is so angry, and he confronts Fitch in the bathroom, and he's like, you're messing with my case. You're messing with like the rules that govern this country. Like you're messing with like the way we do things to make this country run away. And Fitch is just like, I was hired to win. Like everything else is colored bubbles. And like Fitch is like, you think these people care like about negligent distribution? Like they don't. They can't even say the names. They can't even like pronounce the name negligent distribution. They don't care. Like they don't care about truth or justice or your American way. And Roar is like, they're Fitch people. And Fitch is like, my point exactly. And Fitch, I thought he brings up a good point, but he's like, what do you hope to win? Like, if you win this case, you're not going to bring Jacob Wood back. Like, you're going to like, you're just making sure that she goes, like, Celeste Woods goes to the grave in like a better, like, casket. Like, you're not bringing her back. And he's like, all the other like gun violence victims remain rotting in their crypt. And to like, again, like to Fitch, like it's all just numbers. Like to Fitch, it's numbers. And he's like, you're giving her money, but it's never going to be enough money to like make the loss that she has experienced worth it. And he's like, you're never going to bring back all these people who have died. And that's not the point. Like Roar isn't trying to like get a ton of money for Celeste Wood. Like he's trying to stick it to the gun manufacturing company. And with law, like you have this idea of like, what is the point of law? Like what are we trying to do here? Like you can rehabilitate. Like sometimes the point is to rehabilitate. Sometimes it's like you're trying to have restitution. You're trying to make somebody whole after a case. And then sometimes it's like to deter. Because you're trying to have such a harsh statement so people don't do this again. And what Roar is trying to do, he's not trying to get money to like make Miss Wood feel better. He's trying to get money so the gun company is liable. And he's trying to set this precedent that other people can sue gun companies and hold them liable. Like the amount of money speaks to like, he's trying to injure the company in a way that speaks to them. It's not about just getting the money for this woman. And they don't talk about it in the film, but like it brings up, you learn this in class, like what is the point of law? Like what are we trying to do? And in torts cases, a lot of times it's basically to make like the plaintiff whole again, like to make someone whole, to like make up for something. But in criminal cases, it gets into a much more complicated question. Like, are we trying to deter people from doing this by having a harsh statement? Are we trying to send someone to prison? Are we trying to get them rehabilitated? Are we trying to get them to like not commit these crimes again in the future? Are we trying to make someone whole in some way? Really great questions in general. Roar really takes a hit with this though. And that evening he goes to his partners and he tells them, I need to dip into the emergency fund. I've lost my footing in this trial. The next day, Jenkel, the CEO of Vicksburg Firearms, takes the stand. And Roar starts questioning him, and this is when we get into like the marketing of the gun. Roar starts questioning him, and he's like, why would you like market this gun as being a fingerprint resistant if you didn't want it to end up in the hands of criminals? And like if you didn't want to end up in the hands of criminals, or if you didn't know it was going to be used for illegal activity. And he gets very heated. And at some point, like Jenkel is just like denying. And at some point, like Roar is like, okay, well just tell Celeste Wood that it's not your problem. Like he's pressuring him. Like he's like, tell her that it's not your problem. Like the care that Vicksburg Firearms puts into like how these guns are distributed and used is not your problem. So he's firing these questions. At the same time, like Jenkel is getting flustered. The defense lawyer is like objecting, and Fitch is behind him being like, get up and object. The judge is trying to say something, and then all of a sudden Jenkel is just like, I stand by the Second Amendment. And we get to see this great scene where we get to see what a good lawyer Roar is. Like really, like we had just seen that he admitted that he's lost his footing in the trial, but in this scene it was great because he's a good lawyer. And the whole point was to make Jenkel look bad, like to like show that for him, profits are what matters at the end of the day. It doesn't matter where the profits come from or how the gun is used. Profits matter. And he did that. So Jankel leaves and he's so angry and he's like, this is the tactic I was told to use. And he was like, Fitch, I don't like, the jury was very taken back by it. Like they didn't like what they saw. And he was like, I didn't see a friendly face. Like you told me you were going to secure this verdict, Fitch. You need to secure this verdict. And right then Marley calls and Fitch tells her like, okay, I'm going to pay, but I'm going to meet Nicholas Easter. And she's like, okay, let's do it. Nick sneaks out and he meets Fitch. And like, again, you have this really great scene between Wendell Rohr and Reagan Fitch in the bathroom where they're confronting each other. And like, it is such a like good versus evil scene. And you have a man who believes in justice against this like very, very well played villain. And he doesn't feel like a conversation between equals. And then you meet Fitch and Easter, and it feels like a conversation between equals. Like you can tell that Fitch respects Easter for what he's done and for the way they've played both parties. And like, they have a conversation. He's like, I just want, who do you have in the bag? And they discuss who they're going to get to sway the case. And then Fitch leaves like saying, I have a feeling after tonight we're going to be fast friends. And the reason he's saying that is because as they are speaking, Mr. Janovich is at Marley's apartment. And he's waiting to kidnap her, but he's waiting to take her like on a bus at 9 a.m. out of the city. And I think they're just using her as like collateral so that Nick, because they don't have to pay the money is my assumption, but then Nick like makes sure that the jury swings their way. But Marley attacks him. And then she calls Fitch in his house. And I like that because again, like we don't really see at what point Fitch finds out where Marley lives, but apparently he does because he sends Mr. Janovich there. And then she violates him in his home. Because up until now, she's been calling him like the business phone or whatever. She calls him in his house in the middle of the night and is like, the price just went up to $15 million. It was a really good comeback, like them invading each other's in their safe personal space. Then we get to the closing argument. Rohr delivers like a very passionate speech, and he's like, we need to make gun violence the gun industry's problem. He doesn't make it about money, and he doesn't even make it about people's lives. Like he doesn't go, he does a little bit. He's like, my client lost her husband. He's like, we have to make it their responsibility. And, I'm the one that was saying that like the money aspect was to deal a blow to the industry, but like he doesn't bring any of that up. Like, again, true to his character, he's relating to people on a level like this is justice. Like this is what we believe in. Like we have to do what's right for people like Celeste Wood, but then also people in the future who could be in this situation. Like we have to do what's right. The defense delivers their closing arguments, and we don't really hear it as much but it's like we all have emotions, but we also have the law. Like we can't just go by our emotions. We have to go by the law. It sounds like a very like whatever argument, but it really brings up a point that's like, people are wronged all the time. And like, people get hurt all the time. People are like, there's injustice all the time. The law isn't about like, the law should be about justice, but like, it's like, there's so many cases that justice is not served. There's so many situations where bad things happen and people aren't helped. And like, we have the legal structure to address those grievances as best as possible, but like, you need that legal structure. Like we're not all just vigilantes in the street, like doing Wild West, like justice to one another, because like the legal system is meant to like be the place that we litigate these things instead of just taking justice into our own hands. And it to me, it was a good argument, but it's also like a sad argument because I think anybody knows like the legal system in America is like, there's a lot of holes in it. And there's a lot of like things that happen that don't seem fair or equitable. Um, and so like, yeah, it was a good point, and it brings up, the thing that I find sad about the system. Like, you really believe in this world that's like super just and like good wins out in the end. And like, that's not the way it plays out a lot. And on one hand, like, you need the law for that reason. On the other hand, the law is the problem. And again, they don't say any of that in the film. This is just my interpretation as a lawyer. But he does bring up this point that, again, like, you can't go by emotions. You have to like go by the law. While these closing arguments are happening, Doyle is chasing down this alias of Nicholas Easter. They find out that his real name is Jeff Kerr, and he, went to school in Bloomsburg, Indiana. He went to school in Indiana, so he's like chasing down this lead. And basically, he goes to the law school and he meets with one of Nick's professors, and he's like, "You remember, like, Jeff Kerr? Like, was he a student?" And the professor is like, "Yeah, like, he was a student, and he basically did his first year, and between his first and second year of law school, he worked at a firm, and he got to see how big companies like how big firms practice law, and it knocked the idealistic wind out of him. And so his following year, like when his girlfriend Gabby graduated, they dropped out and like disappeared. So Doyle is getting background information on Nick and Marley. In the meantime, Marley calls Roar and she's like, "Hey, you want to buy the verdict?" And Roar's like, "You know what? I can. I have the ability to, but I'm not going to. I'm going to rest on my laurels. I'm going to rest on my trust in people, and I'm going to rest on the case." It's a very quick shot, but we see that someone is listening in the taxi. And again, we don't see Wendell Roar surveilled except for when he's meeting with Marley. So when they meet at Cafe Du Monde, they're being photographed from across the street. That, you don't think about it because they're showing people being photographed all the time. And when Marley is supposed to meet Fitch at Palace Cafe, there's a photographer upstairs waiting to photograph them. And the reason she takes them to the streetcar is because she doesn't want to be photographed and she doesn't want to be followed. But they follow Marley. And so this is interesting because Roar is in his office and he's on the phone with Marley, and his conversation is being overheard in a van. It's a very quick shot. I had to keep rewinding to be like, am I saying what I'm saying? Is this person listening to what they're listening to? It is. The conversation is being listened to. Now, it is super illegal to be listening into a lawyer. If you're the defense, you cannot be listening into the lawyer's case. Super illegal. So in my mind, I was like, if they're listening into Roar, why haven't they just been listening to his side of the case? And maybe they have. Maybe that's how they got to the Excalibur guns seller. Maybe that's how they got to the ex-executive. Maybe they've been listening in and no, I don't think so, because they would have had that information in discovery. Anyway, I found it interesting that they can listen into Wendell Roar's office and they have not used that in any kind of duplicitous way. And it goes to show you that they were never relying on the facts of the case. They were never relying on the merits of the case. They were never relying on the defense's legal skills. They were always relying on Fitch's ability to sway the jury. That was their whole plan. So it doesn't matter that they can listen to Roar's conversation. All that aside, Roar basically tells Marley, "No, I'm not going to pay." So word gets to Fitch, and Fitch tries to be like, "Hey, I heard Roar's not paying. You want to lower the cost?" And Marley's like, "In 30 seconds, you're going to lose anyway, so take it or leave it." And he's like, "Okay, fine." So they wire the money, and it gets to the Cayman Islands. She looks happy, but, again, every time she hangs up, she's a bit scared. But the money gets wired to the Caymans. It is in the bank. Then we get to the jury room. In the jury room, first they're just throwing ideas out and stuff. And the things that they're throwing out are all the kind of very arguments that you would hear. It's we all have a Second Amendment right to bear arms. This is product liability. They bring up what I was talking about with causation. If I get fat from McDonald's, am I going to sue them for health issues? They bring up all these key issues. What's his name? Grimes is basically how about we just take a preliminary vote to see where things are? At that moment, Nick gets a beeper text saying money in. It doesn't say who gets paid. Like, it doesn't say who gets paid. I have to point that out. The beeper just says money in. It doesn't say who paid. So I think if you had any suspicions about what's happening, that should be a clue for you. That it doesn't say Fitch paid. It doesn't say Roar paid, which would have fit within that like little beeper screen. It said money in. That is a key, that it doesn't matter who paid. They were always going to swing the case in the way that they wanted. That's it. The money goes in. And Nick is like, you know what? We need to talk about the merits of the case. He doesn't say anything else. He says, let's examine like the case. Like, let's examine what has gone on in the case. Herrera gets really like worked up, and Herrera calls him out for being a plaintiff's boy. He gets in a heated argument, and he brings up the point that like people don't get compensated because they've been hurt. We really see why Herrera was like the defendant's prime choice to be foreman and just to be on the trial, because he's like, again, he's talking about money. He's like, for Herrera, it's like, it's a very interesting point because it is about the money and it's not about the money. Like, he thinks in money. He's like, we all deserve that money. Like, she doesn't deserve that money for the pain she's been through. Like, I have been through so much too. Where's my money for it? And he's like, like, he basically is just so upset. And he's like, at one point, he's like, screw the law. Like, I don't care if they gave him an M16 with his morning donut. Like, I'm not giving her a cent. And it's a very, going back again to like money and power versus values. Like, we see money and power with Fitch play out in a way that's like influential and is like, I am going to make things happen my way. And Frank is kind of the opposite of that. Like, he's kind of the person who's like, I don't have money and I don't have power. And why should someone have that when they're just as deserving of that as I am? Like, it's an interesting point because he doesn't like, his point is that he doesn't have money. And he doesn't even say like, if he had that money, it would make a difference to him. But it's just like, as someone who doesn't have money and who doesn't have power, but has the power to influence this, like, I don't see why someone should have the money. Like, why her and not me? And like, that's such a emotional level. It's like a good, it's a really deep point. Like, why does she get compensated and not me? Like, why does she get to be okay? Why does she get money and not me? But it comes off in the conversation like much more like brazen and much more callous. And it's just like, screw that. Like, she doesn't deserve it. We all deserve it. We all get hurt. We all don't go suing people for it. She doesn't deserve it. And like, once Nick exposes this really, really, really like harsh, heartless view of Frank's, I made Frank's view seem much more nicer than it was. But once he exposes this really heartless view of Frank's, he's like, who sides with Frank? Like, it was such a genius moment because Grimes at first was like, let's take a vote. And then Nick and Herrera get into this tiff. He exposes Herrera as just like this cold, heartless person. And then he's like, who sides with him once he's exposed him for who he is? And, a few times we've seen people like doing things out of peer pressure and stuff. And this is like a time where you can rely on the humanity of people. Like, nobody is siding with Frank because they feel pressured to, which is what Fitch was like relying on. He was relying on like Herrera, and he was relying on peer pressure to some degree. He was relying on like Herrera being able to sway people. And like, nobody's doing that, because when you just look at someone on this level and they're like, I don't agree with what you agree with. Like, I don't believe in what you believe and I don't want to side with you. And Nick doesn't turn it and say, okay, like, we should vote for Celeste Wood. He doesn't say that. He's like, okay, let's go over the testimony again. And again, I thought that was a really great point, because like, Nick isn't Fitch. Like, Nick isn't trying to like pressure the jury in any kind of way. He just wants this to be a fair trial. So he forces them to examine the testimony again. At this point, Doyle has found out that Jeff Kerr, who was a law student, dropped out with his girlfriend, Gabrielle Brandt, from Gardner, Indiana. So he goes to Gabby's house where he meets Gabby's mother. And we finally get like Gabby's backstory. Basically, she had a sister. They were, just a year apart. And one day a boy showed up at the school with a gun that he bought off the street and he started shooting. The sister Margaret was with Jeff, Nick Easter, at the time. They were like, just standing together after school or in school or whatever. And he ducks down and he couldn't pull her down. And he always thought there was something that he could have done. And it's such a powerful scene because we see why this is personal for Nick and Marley. Like, this isn't about money. We kind of have gotten the sense that it was personal from them, but like Marley lost a sister to gun violence, and Jeff was with the sister at that time. And like, I think they mentioned they were Irish twins because like they were all hanging out together, and he was with her and he ducked down and he couldn't pull her down. And that guilt has weighed on him and driven him to this point that him and Marley have gone this far in seeking justice for her. And, I have to say, like, it goes back to what I was saying about the opening scene. Like, I'd say the opening scene was very quick. It was very harried. Like, you have a moment where the shooting stops and then the door bangs open and they shoot Jacob Wood. Like they kind of talk about it, that like the shooting happened so fast that, Margaret, like Jeff didn't have time to act. Margaret didn't have time. Like, she froze and she was killed. And that's all it took. And I bring that up because like the Parkland shooting happened under 6 minutes, like Sandy Hook happened under 5 minutes. And like, when you look at these, like, Uvalde was a bit longer for sure, but like you look at these cases and it's a lot of damage that happens in a very short amount of time. And this is why it's such a severity with like assault weapon rifles, is because they can do so much damage in a short amount of time. And so this is the reason why the opening scene happens. They say it in the case. They say that the shooting that killed Jacob Wood in this movie happened under 2 minutes. They tie it together at the end here that like it didn't take a long time. She just froze, and in the act of freezing, she was killed. And like, again, like it's true to what like, again, like how like powerful these weapons are. And it's also like why assault weapons have been really like the ones that cause so much damage in these mass shootings, but also like why there's cases against them, which I'm going to get into later. But again, like I'm bringing all this up because like it was an interesting like idea that they introduced at the beginning that they actually bring up here, and they don't even say it explicitly, but like you can put it together and you can understand from what you see in the beginning and what the mother says about her daughter just freezing and it happening so fast that these things happen so quickly. And that's why sometimes like, that's why the negligence and the blame has to rest with a gun manufacturer, because it's the amount of damage that the actual gun can do in such a short amount of time, and yes, it can end up in the wrong hands, but it can end up in so many hands and people can do so much damage with it, and they have to be more conscious with the distribution of it. Yeah, really, really like eye-opening scene that we see this case is personal for Marley. While he's figuring this out, like he run, like the second Doyle figures this out, he runs outside, he calls Fitch and he's like, do not wire the money. And at that moment, Marley is calling the police and reporting a robbery at the location where Fitch's headquarters are. So the police are coming. It is chaotic. And they're like, 5-0, like we have got to wrap up, like leave them on us, put everything in boxes. We have to go. They cannot be found tampering with the jury. Like they cannot be found. This cannot get recorded. They have to exit. Fitch, had just gotten off the phone and was told like, oh, I shouldn't wire the money because of this case in Gardner, Indiana. And there's a very harried scene between these two workers. And one of them is like, what happened in Gardner, in Indiana in 1989? And the other one is like, Gardner, Indiana, the town, again, the facts of the case. So the shooting that killed Marley's sister, in the aftermath, the town sued Blackwell Arms and they lost. And the town went bankrupt and Fitch worked the case. So now we know that this is not even just personal against Marley and Easter. This is personal to Fitch. They were coming after Fitch. Like they wanted to get him because he is the one who worked the case that basically made them lose this case in Gardner, Indiana. And it speaks to like the fallacy of Fitch. Like he sees people as numbers, and like it touches on the conversation in the bathroom when Roar's like, they're people, Fitch, and Roar's like, my point exactly. Like people are just numbers to him. Like they're not humans. They're not a society. They're not a group of people. They're just numbers. They're just profiles. And I'm not saying he would remember Marley and Easter from way back when, because they would have been so young. They would have been like high school or college. Like, I'm not saying he would remember them, but it never occurred to him that this could happen. It never occurred to him that he could be vulnerable in this way. Like that his actions are affecting real people's lives. Like that's what he missed. He missed that his actions affect people's lives. Like to him, it was like $1. It was a paycheck. It was a verdict. Like it was all clean cut deals. And he was missing that behind those deals were lives that continued on after the verdict. And he never thought that this life would intersect with his again at this point. So he's in shock. He runs into the courtroom right when the jury hands down a verdict for Celeste Wood. We get this like very happy scene. Everyone is cheering. And he goes to a bar defeated, and Marley and Nick show up, and he's like, they're going to appeal, which is true. They're going to appeal. And they're like, yeah, they will, but not with you. Because if you ever show up on any case, like we're going to send this confirmation of payment to the IRS, Justice Department, the Federal Board of Judicial Review, and you'll be off the case. Like you can never work again. And they say that they're going to give that money to the victims' families. And like Fitch asks, he's like, how did you swing the jury? And Nick is like, I didn't swing them. I just stopped you from stealing the thing. I let them vote their hearts. And then we end with Nick and Marley watching the kids play, and then Wendell Roar passes by, and he kind of notices that like Marley and Nick know each other, and it's all just confirmation that they were working together, but that they were working towards something good. And we end there. Very, very beautiful feel-good movie. We get such a typical like happy courtroom cheering moment, and the bad guy sitting alone at a bar. It was a good ending and a very feel-good ending. Okay. So now we have finished analyzing the film, but we are not done. I wanted to dig into some behind the scenes stuff, not behind the scenes of like the movie, but behind the scenes of the law. So one question that I had was, how common are stealth jurors? And are there trials that we know of? I don't get the impression it's very, like it's common, but it's not common in like a landmark case kind of way. It's common in the sense that like people might have an opinion about a case, and they try and play to be unbiased, but like it probably happens, but it happens in the sense that you do get biased people on jurors, or people with hidden agendas, really. A few cases that I saw that they think had a stealth juror was the Scott Peterson trial for the murder of his wife, Lacey Peterson. I actually don't know much about that case, but I think they think there was a stealth juror on there. They suspect a stealth juror in Martha Stewart's trial because after the trial, there was someone who was doing a lot of media coverage about the trial. There was I thought this was interesting. In 2004, Tyco International, the judge called for a mistrial because the juror said she received a letter pressuring her to convict the defendants. So I thought that was interesting. It was the opposite. The plaintiff was like pressuring this juror to convict the defendants. And in this case, the judge, she presented the letter, the judge called a mistrial. And at that point, they had been 6 months into trial. Really interesting point because, earlier Marley says, like, you're not going to put Celeste Woods through another trial. The movie makes it seem like it's a week. It makes it seem like this entire thing happened in the week. No, trials are a long time. Like, it is a long process. And if you are going to like have a mistrial and go through the whole process again, that's so much money, it's so much effort, so much time. They didn't want to do that again. So I thought it was interesting that in this case, they were 6 months into trial when this happened. And I'm not even sure they went to trial again after that. I didn't find all the facts of that case. They think that there was a stealth juror in the George Zimmerman case in the killing of Trayvon Martin. They were worried about the stealth juror in the Trump hush money case, which I feel like that's a case that's really hard to go on to and then not have an opinion on. And they are worried about a stealth juror for the Luigi Mangione case. Mangione. They're worried about stealth juror for the Luigi Mangione case. Those are the few that I can find. I'm sure there are so many more. That was just a bit of background. Again, like in the real world, these things don't play out the way they play out in the movie. Like it's so cinematic and it's a landmark case and blah, blah, blah. And I'm not saying they haven't happened, but we don't know of something to this extent. Like nothing has come forward to this extent that we see in this film. I also wanted to give a bit of background about the status of gun cases, because they kept saying like nobody's won a case against a gun manufacturing company. So I was wondering, like, what was the status of court cases against gun manufacturers at the time that the film came out? And according to my research, like there was actually a lot of cases brought in the 80s and 90s against gun manufacturers. Like they were holding them liable for selling products and basically it was like they were being sued for being like a societal risk. In 1999, there was a case that was Hamilton v. Accutech that basically, like the whole basis of the claim was that gun manufacturers were negligent in their marketing and distribution policies. And like prior to this, I think they were just holding a lot of gun manufacturers like liable for like, hey, you were like responsible for this, but calling them like negligent in their marketing and distribution practices, like that helped their guns get into the hands of criminals, which is like the exact what we see in the film. It kind of opened the door for like all new lawsuits, because it was like, oh, like, you don't have to be like directly liable. Like if you are marketing it in a way that makes it more likely a criminal will use it, or if you make it easier for like the gun to end up in a criminal's hands, like you can be held liable. This case was overturned on appeal, but it still opened the door for a lot of lawsuits to have come through. And actually, they're saying that this case is the case that led basically to the passage of like Congress enacted the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act in 2005, which gave it barred all civil lawsuits against the gun industry. There are like a few narrow exceptions, but like it's so narrow. One exception is this case in Missouri in which, the woman had like mental health issues. The store was warned not to sell a gun to her. They did it anyway, and she ended up killing her father. The court held that you can hold the gun manufacturer responsible in this case. Now, the thing about like these cases going through that I want to mention is that like just because you have a case, like the movie made it seem like when you have a case that can go through, you get a flood of lawsuits. So you see that with the the Hamilton versus Accutech case that I mentioned, when they talked about like negligent marketing and negligent distribution, it did open up the doors for a lot of lawsuits. A lot of lawsuits can come through. It doesn't mean all the lawsuits are successful. It does mean that the manufacturers have to deal with those lawsuits, but it doesn't mean they're successful. So I'm bringing this up because, again, 2005, we had the PLCAA go through. And then in 2016, we had this case go through that was an example of like a narrow exception to the rule. But that doesn't necessarily mean that like further cases are going to go through. It's not like, okay, I found this one exception, it's all going to work. And I bring this up because the families of the victims in the Sandy Hook shooting were actually able to sue Remington Firearms. I think they brought the case in 2016. The argument in this case, and this goes back to like how the legal question is different from case to case. So the legal question in the case that the families of the Sandy Hook victims brought was saying that like their lawsuit fell under basically Remington's marketing violated Connecticut's Unfair Trade Practices Act. That's Connecticut law. Like they were successful because they brought it in Connecticut, and it was a mix between it being the exact right jurisdiction, the exact right law that they were saying was violated in this jurisdiction, and what Remington did like played into that. So this is what I'm saying, that like just because a case goes through doesn't mean like the floodgates of the case are open and you're like, oh, I have a new like issue, I can bring it on. It's not that easy. And, you know, the victims of Sandy Hook were able to bring this because like there's this like Connecticut Unfair Trade Practices Act, and the way that Remington Firearms was marketing the gun, like the gun that was used by the shooter, like the marketing was targeted to like younger, like boys who played video games. Like they used the phrase like "consider your man card reissued," and basically like the Connecticut Unfair Trade Practices Act basically says like companies can be liable if they engage in irresponsible marketing of their products. So if you're marketing a gun to be like a cool, like in IRL version of like a video game gun, like that's irresponsible. It was very much like towards men who were troubled, men who had issues, like spoke to, like one of the things said, in a world of like rapidly depleting testosterone, the Bushmaster man card declares and confirms that you are a man's man. And like using terms like forces of opposition bow down, you are single-handedly outnumbered. Like they tie into this, like these themes of video games, but they bring it into the real world where these aren't like Sims, like these aren't like, you know, like this is the real world. And it was super dangerous marketing. So like my point is like, you know, it's amazing that this case went through. This case won. They won $73 million, and like they're able to bring it, but like they were able to get through this narrow exception because of this like Connecticut case, because of the jurisdiction that they're in, because of the exact circumstances of the case. It's why you can't just have like class action suits against gun manufacturers, because the circumstances are different. The laws that are governing the cases are different. This case is so different from the case that we are seeing against other mass shooting victims in other states. Like, it's such a like specific case, and I think that's what makes it harder. And it's also not a promise that cases are going to go through in the future, but I'm really grateful that this case went through. I'm really grateful that this case happened. If we're going to go even further looking at the complexities of legal matter, just last year, parents were held liable for letting their child have a gun. This was in Michigan. Their child basically committed a mass shooting, and the parents were held liable, being like, you knew your son had issues, you didn't help him, you let him have a gun, and you didn't monitor how he was using that gun. So you're liable, and they were convicted for involuntary manslaughter. And definitely don't want to go into the complexities of that case. You can look it up, but I guess my point is like the cases around guns are still evolving, and like even though we have this like act still in place, people, different candidates have talked about like reforming this act and changing it and stuff like that. And I don't know if we've seen anything yet, but like definitely cases being brought. Like the law is ever evolving, the situation is ever evolving. Like what happened in last year with holding the parents liable was kind of like a very interesting take, and it's one of the first of its kind of holding parents liable for these things. So yeah, we're going to see how this goes forward. Obviously also like gun violence has just become a very severe thing in our country. So I did want to talk a bit about like the way it's increased over time. So in 2023, according to the FBI, like a quick look at active shooter situations, in 2003, we had 29 people get killed and 22 wounded in an active shooter situation. In 2024, we had 500 mass shootings. And, I got the over 500 mass shootings from the Gun Violence Archive. So like, it's definitely worth looking at and getting into more details. They break it down in a very like interesting way. So I didn't, you can go look at that yourself. And yeah, like, I guess my point is like, it's a continuing issue. It's an evolving problem. I do want to say I'm trying to end on good news. After the Parkland School massacre, Dick's Sporting Goods said that they would stop selling assault weapons. Walmart announced the same. Kroger said it. Fred Meyers, I don't know what that is, but they said it. Like people are just becoming much more aware of like how they sell things, how they distribute things. It's a serious issue. Like I said, like, I know where I stand on it, and I'm not someone I've never liked guns or anything. I can respect we have the Second Amendment and people have a right to bear arms. I'm just, given that in mind, I just really want us to have responsible gun ownership. This is definitely something that I care a lot about. And in that vein, like I am going to share a few links in the bio. I found the Johns Hopkins University like Center for Gun Violence. Like I just thought it had a lot of interesting information. I tend to go to a lot of educational institutions to look at like what some of their policy programs are. I find them very interesting, and just looking through the Johns Hopkins site, I really liked this. So I'm going to include a link. I also want to include a link for everytown.org, which seems to be doing a lot for gun reform on very like local and community levels. I also want to really include the link to the Sandy Hook Promise, which of course I guess is like ending gun violence. And I'm going to include also a link for mental health information, just because like it's very interconnected, it's very tied. I forgot to mention that in the film, actually, the person who committed the shooting was fired from his job on a Friday, and he showed up on Monday and shot at the office. And like, mental health and struggles all play into this. And I really didn't touch on it at all in this essay, but it is definitely an issue. So I do want to include some resources and links for that. And that kind of wraps it up. But that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. Tune back next time. We're going to be doing a film that is not a legal film, but I will see you soon. Okay, I thought at some point that I would get hot and take off my sweatshirt, but I'm wearing my Living My Fest Life sweatshirt underneath. And basically these two pieces of clothing are the only pieces of clothing I have from New Orleans. I don't own Saints things. I don't own New Orleans things. I don't know why. That's it. I just have a PJ sweatshirt and this shirt, so I had to wear them both. I was getting hot, but I was so caught up in talking that I didn't take my sweatshirt off the whole time. But yeah, I had to represent New Orleans for this one. Yeah,